Agreed. Huge remarks.
Greetings. Welcome to the Science of Farming podcast. I am Sister Rasheedah Muhammad.
I am Sister Melody Muhammad.
Praise be to Allah. Sister Melody, I'm so honored to host this podcast with you, mainly because our beloved minister, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, has reminded us in his many messages that farming and agriculture is the first profession that Allah God introduced to man. And he's also said that farming is the engine of our national life. So when we talk about food, period, we have to thank Almighty God, Allah, who appeared in the person of Master Fard Muhammad, for giving to the most honorable Elijah Muhammad the information contained in the How to Eat to Live books 1 and 2. And we thank Allah for giving us the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan, who has always said he is giving us tomorrow's headlining news today. And he did just that when he told us to grow our own food years ago. We also want to take just a moment to thank Supreme Harvest, which consists of a handful of believers who have come together to try and map out where we can grow food collectively and network with farmers and believers throughout our nation while supporting our nation's staple goods program. We thank them for their support and sponsorship of this podcast and for doing as we are taught, which is to think for the whole, not just for ourselves. Of course, we also would like to thank Student Minister James Muhammad, of the CEO of Closing the Gap Broadcast Network, and his support staff for their support and assistance throughout this process. And lastly, but certainly not least, we thank our families and friends for their love and support. And we thank you, the audience, for joining us tonight and invite you back every Tuesday at 6 p.m. So here we are, Sister Melody, on our first podcast, named by our beloved Sister Melody, called The Science of Farming. All praise is due to Allah. Now, Sister Melody, the floor is yours. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about us or a little bit about yourself, and then I'll share a little bit about myself.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. So I'm Sister Melody Muhammad. Grew up in Harlem, New York. Didn't know anything about farming, let alone, how to grow my own food. So a few years back, I want to say about 10 years now, Minister Louis Farrakhan, Dr. Aleem, and a few others, had asked if 2 people from each region would go to Will Allen's Growing Power for training. So, yes, I was one of those people that was able to go to Will Allen's Growing Power and get trained by Will Allen himself. I tell you, family and friends, that if I didn't get trained by Will Allen, I don't think I would be where I am today, because he made it so simple. And that's what our goal is for this show, is to make it as simple as possible to let you know that any of us can do this. So I got the CUA, which is a certification in urban agriculture. After that, we came back to Chester, Pennsylvania, and we built a hoop house ourselves. I mean, we built a hoop house with the youth and the elderly. We all ages came out to support us. A few different colleges came out to support us, and we grew food. We grew everything that we wanted to grow, and it grew. So I was excited. I became super passionate about it, super passionate about helping others to grow food. And from there, we are always continuing to be students. So I got certification in Master Garden program through Penn State. I also got a certification in the Master Steward program through Penn State. And I also got a Master Well certification through Penn State. And we continue to get, as much workshops and education as we can. I am a tree tender, so we plant trees with Philadelphia Horticulture Society. And I plant trees wherever I go if I can. If I have them, I'm planting them because we need that. So I don't want to go on and on about myself, but I just wanted to give you a little backdrop of some of the training that I had and some of the experience that, we had, this far. So Sister Rasheedah, is all on you.
Praise be to Allah. Thank you so much, my beloved sister. Yes, I'm Sister Rasheedah Muhammad, as I mentioned. And I was born and raised right here in Tampa, and I'm married to student minister Ali Muhammad. And I do attend Muhammad Mosque 47. And I do know a little bit about cattle. A few years ago, I did own some cattle. So I really got a lot of good experience about that and how they move and how they need to be cared for. And after hearing the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan years later tell us to grow our own food, I began to jump right into growing our own food. And I did so not by training, as our beloved sister did, but I did so by trial and error. So I learned along the way, and I really enjoyed it. It's so funny. I'm that sister that when you go to Home Depot, if you see anybody standing in the gardening aisle or in that section and just absorbing all of that energy, that's me. I don't even want to leave there. I just imagine that that's how my garden is, absolutely perfect with everything growing perfectly at the same time. But anybody knows anything about gardening, they know that that's not necessarily the case. So we're going to go ahead and move on further into our program. And we're going to do so by, first, I do want to say this, family. If anybody has any questions on the information that we're about to cover, please feel free to go ahead and put your question in the chat, and we'll do our best at the end of the show to get to your question. So now we're going to jump into a few things that you need to know up front. And the first thing we do need to know is about growing and our growing zones, because you can't grow everywhere, everything, all the time, everywhere. So the climate does matter. And one of the things I'll talk about very quickly, it would be the Old Farmer's Almanac. You can get an Old Farmer's Almanac. They even have them online now that tell you exactly what you can grow in your growing zone. And what time of year you can grow those things. And this is a picture of the almanac right here. Now, that is what we've been going on. However, Sister Melody is going to talk to you about another thing, because we know Allah is doing some things new with this weather, and we have to move when He moves and adjust our planting schedule accordingly. Sister Melody?
Oh, yes, those almanacs are, a source that, people have been using for years. However, because of climate change, we have to consider, one, you want to find out what zone you're in. So give or take, usually people plant outside around Mother's Day. How nice, right? Mother's Day. So usually that's when the temperature of the soil is above 40. And won't go below 40, because if it's below 40, you're going to lose your plants. So the soil temperature is important. Once, you can do some things inside. So we were taught by Will Allen to build a hoop house, because the hoop house is protection against some of those chemtrails and things of that nature, some of the pesticides that your neighbor might be using, even flooding. The hoop houses can, protect from wind, a lot of things like that. So when it comes to planting, you want to at least consider now that we are in a time where it's a slightly different than it used to be. So we're doing all we can, and we usually go by our own soil. So, and we'll do that in another session, but just wanted to let you know that the soil has been contaminated as far as we're concerned. So we use our own soil, which is compost. And I'm not going to go too far into that right now. So we're going to stick with the basics.
I know one of those, we're going to talk about 5 things that we need to know when you're talking about growing. And I know, Sister Melody, one of those things is light. You have to consider your light source. You want to give us some information on that?
God, Allah, for the sun, because that's where we get, and we pray that we get most of our light from. However, nowadays you have things like LED lighting for indoor plants and things. I have one here that I wanted to show you. Wanted to click it on real quick. So, that's a little bit, I don't know if you have to see that, but you have different sources of artificial lighting. And this is just one that I had used for indoors when I was teaching a class that and it works. However, it's not the best. If you can get the sunlight, you want to plant in an area that gives you at least 6 hours of sunlight throughout the day. So keep in mind when you're planning that you want to look for areas around your home or your windowsill that has sun that comes in throughout the day. Last week, Sister Rasheedah, I had to cut some trees back just so I'll be able to get that full 6 hours sun in one of the areas that I was planting in. So yeah, we want to consider the area that you're going to plant in and make sure that, you have, some sun. And unfortunately, a few weeks ago, we didn't have much sun. So, those are also things we had to factor in. If, the sun, if it's cloudy, then you're going to have to maybe use some artificial lighting sometime. And that's pretty much for indoors. But those things we have to consider now.
Yes, ma'am. Now, it's so interesting when you're dealing with light because, some things grow where it needs a little bit of shade. So I was thinking about container gardening. So when you have container gardening, you have the ability to move those containers around, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And Sister Melda, I was even thinking about the raised bed gardens. That sometimes you may have a portion of your raised bed that's in the sun, and sometimes a portion that's actually in shade. So you do need to consider what you're planting under those 2 different climatic situations, right?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. And when you think about container gardening, I'm doing it in an area, this year because I'm not actually doing it, when we talk about gardening for the main part of this program, we're not talking about commercial farming. So all of those things, Sister Rasheedah, that you mentioned will be the things that we'll be dealing with because we're not at a level where we're using commercial gardening where you need tractors and things like that. I have done them. I have worked with them, but for this podcast where we getting people started, I just wanted to show you this little egg carton that you can use. This one is biodegradable. So if you had the plastic one, you would just punch holes in this part, separate the 2, put this underneath, and the water would catch underneath the bottom. And you could put this in the windowsill and start your seeds. And then once it gets to another, 3 to 6 inches, you could transplant it into something like this. And you see under there, you always want to be mindful of the drainage to make sure you have proper drainage. And when it comes to that soil, again, as we spoke about, you want it to be black. black and rich and pretty and just, without rocks. You don't want soil that's all clumpy and bunched together. You want to be able to, once you open your fist with it, you want it to just fall apart. So, you want to give your plants some air and flow to grow.
Right. Yes, ma'am. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that air actually as we proceed. Now, the other thing that we have to consider when we are planting is water. Water is very, very important. Our water source, our drainage. Can you talk about some of the things or some of the ways that we can water?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. So we always want to consider anything that's going to be sustainable. So if you have, I know some of the houses in North Carolina do not have the what do they call it, the gutters. So
Right.
if you have gutters in some places, they have Philadelphia have a program where you could get rain barrels and you could catch your rainwater. Rainwater is the best. I mean, absolute best for your flowers, your plants, and everything that you're growing. However, if there's no water, we're going to have to use the water that we have, of course. And then if it's a water shortage, you got to factor that too. So that's another reason why you want to be in a position to try to save water, have water on hand for all kind of things. And like this week when we went through such a hot spell in a lot of different cities, you got to factor that as well. So now that we went through this hot spell, trust and believe that these vegetables are going to go up in price because the farmers are not having good luck because of that dry sprout, like the last few days ago. So all of that plays a factor when it comes to food. So I always encourage people to do what you can do where you at, connect with your local people. So, y'all could come up with plans and things for emergencies and just to have local food at hand.
And Sister Melody, when you were talking, the first thing I thought about is when you're dealing with plants, because I've planted a number of things in containers. And I tell you what, when you are self-watering, it is time consuming. So that's what people need to understand. If you start growing in containers, or even if you're growing in a raised bed, and you're trying to self-water, it is very time consuming. So irrigation systems, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, ma'am. So irrigation systems can be connected right to your hose. So what we do is usually put them on a timer. Especially if you have raised beds now, a lot of people are putting those on timers, and they're not expensive. The little irrigations that you could put down for, your plants and things of that nature. And it's important to water, your plants in the morning before it gets really hot. And it's important to water them in the afternoon when the sun goes down a little bit, because, they need life. They need water, and the water and the sun give your plants life. So we want to keep in mind that those are the things that's necessary for your plants to thrive. And we want our plants to thrive. And then yes, those are the things that we have to factor in when it comes to the water.
Thank you. I'm so glad you talked about that watering schedule in the morning and afternoon, because that is very important, especially here in Florida, because it is hot. Ooh, it is hot and humid. So the plants have a tendency to dry out a little bit quicker than normal. Yes. And so the next thing we're going to talk about is air, because you kind of touched on it a little bit when you were talking about that soil. So why is that so important to know as one of the first things you should really consider when you're growing?
Yes, ma'am. So we want to factor in that if you have a tomato plant, and depending on if it's a beefsteak tomato or if it's a cherry tomato, you have to factor, you need spacing that's going to be wide, because your tomato plant, will be about 4 inches. And in 2 months, it can be about 3 feet tall, easy. And it could be full and it's heavy. Tomato plants are heavy. So you need spacing around your plants in order for them to thrive. And then you need soil, again, that's loose. You don't want your soil to be compacted. And again, we use compost You can get free compost from some of the schools that you might be around or some of the extension programs that's around. Of course, we make ours and we'll talk about that at another time. But you could get some soil from, I want to say, Home Depot or wherever your nursery is in your area that is loose. You don't want to use the soil that's, down on the earth that's we know is contaminated with any and everything that we have no clue what it is. And today we really want to be able to do what we have to do.
Yes, ma'am. And when you were talking, Sister Melody, and you were talking about that tomato plant growing big, it reminded me of one year I went to a nursery event that they were having at the University of South Florida here in Tampa, and I was looking specifically for a mango tree or mango plant so that I can plant. And I tell you, they had a mango tree there, and they said, okay, well, if you plant this, you need to have this type of space. And that thing was huge. I forgot how huge mango trees grow. So considering the spacing and the air, all of that is so very, very important. And so next topic, go ahead. Yes, ma'am.
I was just going to add to that, Sister Rasheedah, that on the back of the seed packages, it usually provide for you the amount of spacing you need
That is a good point.
So you can look on the back of it, or nowadays you can use AI or Google and see what type of spacing you need for whatever you plan to plant.
That's a good, very, very good point. And that's the whole point of this broadcast here. This podcast is to encourage everyone to start somewhere. You can start. And like she said, don't try to do commercial gardening. Try to do just some small container gardening, and we'll inform you on how to do that as the shows continue. So we talked about air, and let's talk some more about nutrients, because you were kind of touching on that with that soil and how the nutrients are very important to have in the soil.
Yes, ma'am. I'm just going to plug one thing up and you can, start with it, and I'll come right in just a minute.
Yes, ma'am. The soil is very, very important based on what you want to grow. You want to make sure that you have the nutrients. You need to have your nitrogen, your carbon that needs to be balanced appropriately according to what you're growing. And we'll get more into soil development, because I know a lot of people are interested in compost and growing their own soil, as opposed to getting what's available at Home Depot or any of these other markets where the soil may be contaminated or have too many products in it that we're not really, we don't even want to use or introduce to our flower bed. So the soil composition is very important. Also, I do know that depending on what you're growing, like I grow pineapples. So with pineapples in the soil that I have, I can grow those pineapples in the same spot. They're just going to keep coming back and producing for me. And by the way, they are so sweet and delicious. But also, if you're planting something like beans, then that's going to take a lot of the nutrients out of the soil. So when those nutrients pull out of the soil, that much to feed that plant and that product, you don't want to go ahead and plant beans back in that same spot. You have to go and kind of replenish and nourish that area again before you want to go and plant beans right back in that spot. And Sister Melody, you have anything else you want to add to that?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Also, yeah, you touched on it where, you have to be mindful of the nutrients. And, for that, if you're using compost in a raised bed, most of the time it decreases your weeds. Like you might not even have any weeds if you plant right with the compost. So that's another benefit of using compost, in your raised beds and in your potting soil. I mean, your containers. So the finer your soil is, the less weeds you're going to have. So yes, Sister Rasheedah mentioned that the soil, I know the minister had to, Will Allen came to the farm and they had to plant peanuts to fluff the soil up, just so they were able to plant navy beans. So yeah, all of those things are scientifically factored in order for us to be able to provide, a quality food for, our, people.
I believe we're almost out of time already, Sister Melody. And I know that we wanted to get into the benefits of the raised garden versus the container garden, but we're going to have to add that to the next show. But I tell you what, can we check to see if we have any questions in the chat so that we can answer those very quickly before we close out? Okay, we don't have any questions in the chat as of yet. So please, family, again, don't be shy. Ask us any questions that we have that's related to the information that we have. And we do want to ask your continued support of this broadcast, Closing the Gap broadcast. Can you put that scroll across the bottom? Closing the Gap broadcast. You can make any type of donations that you have. The information will be coming up soon, as well as if you have any questions that you think about later and you'd like to reach out to us, you can do so at scienceoffarming@gmail.com, scienceoffarming@gmail.com. And then we have some other information where you can contact us as well. We do have an IG account at Fancy Farmer Mel. And then we have Sister Melody's Facebook account. And if you ever touch bases with Sister Melody's account, she always posting something very beautiful on her account with gardening. I'm a little more away from Facebook, but can you put her Facebook information up as well? Okay, it's Melody Muhammad. Melody Muhammad, that's her Facebook information. Now, to close out, we're going to make two very quick announcements. So let's go ahead and put up the first flyer. And Sister Melody, you can talk about this because this information was given to us. And since it is both flyers related to agriculture, we wanted to share it with you all, number one. And number two, if you all have any events in the Ministry of Agriculture or any of the other events that you all are doing in your mosque or community, let us know at scienceoffarming@gmail.com and we can get that information to you. Okay, the earth is what she's talking about. Yes. So go ahead, Sister Melody, and you can talk about this first event that's coming up.
Okay. Yes, ma'am. So this event here is going to be a lecture by our one and only Dr. Ridgely, our Minister of Agriculture for the Nation of Islam. So that'll be June 29th from 2 to 4 p.m. And if you're in the southern region, or if you're not, you could call for more information at 866-232-3512. Again, that's 866-232-3512. It's at the bottom of the flyer. And hopefully, you get some real up-to-date information from our one and only Dr. Ridgely Muhammad.
Praise be to Allah. Thank you so much. And then we'll make the announcement on the second flyer that we did receive. And this event is going to be held in Atlanta, Georgia. And it's called Muhammad's Day Meet and Greet. And it's being sponsored by the NOI Arts and Culture Ministry of Atlanta. They will be performing, but down in the bottom on the left side, you see where it does talk about the Ministry of Agriculture. They are going to do have some programming there and some information available. So if you are available to attend either of those events, we definitely encourage you to do so because they both will be talking about agriculture. And we want to make sure that we are doing what our minister asked us to do. That's plant our food, grow our own food, because as I mentioned at the beginning of the broadcast, he said that he would give us tomorrow's news today, tomorrow's headlining news today. And he did that when he said, plant your food, because look at the resources we have and the choices we have for food. So that's the end of our show for today. Praise be to Allah. It went rather fast. Now to next week's show, we are going to talk more about developing that soil and growing that soil and some of the benefits of container gardening. So we welcome you back, and it's been a pleasure. We greet you in peace and paradise. Assalamu alaikum.